Good morning. My name is David Lepofsky. I'm the chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. We are a nonpartisan, voluntary coalition of people with disabilities and people without disabilities who have united to ensure a barrier-free province for over 1.7 million Ontarians who now have a disability and all those who will get one in the future. We've called this press conference today to unveil the election commitments that we have received from the political parties on the issue of what they will do to make Ontario fully accessible for all people with disabilities if they are elected in the election to take place some weeks from now. Our coalition, or its predecessor, the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee, has been involved in advocating on accessibility since as far back as 1994, and we have been involved in soliciting election commitments over now 5 election campaigns, including this one. And in each of the elections, from 1995, 1999, 2003, 2007, and this one, we've had commitments from at least 2, if not more, of the major political parties. This issue of accessibility touches the lives of everyone. Ontario has, we estimate, at least 1 million voters with disabilities. That is a voting bloc that cannot be ignored or left behind by anyone seeking public office. We also know that disability ultimately touches everyone's life, because everyone either has a disability now or has someone near and dear to them who has a disability, like a family member, or will get a disability at some point in their life if they live long enough, because the most common cause of disability is aging. What's the problem we've sought election commitments to address? People with disabilities, whether a physical disability, like needing to use a wheelchair, or a sensory disability, like deafness, or in my case, blindness, or a mental or learning or intellectual disability, we face too many barriers in our everyday life. They could be physical barriers, like not being able to get into a public building where important public services are provided or goods are sold. Those barriers could be technological barriers, like inaccessible websites or electronic kiosks. Or those barriers can be communication barriers, like the lack of sign language interpreter services when dealing with important public services. There are many different kinds of barriers we face. Those barriers are illegal and have been since 1982. The Human Rights Code and the Charter of Rights makes them illegal except where removing or preventing them would cause an undue hardship. The problem is, to enforce those rights, we've had to sue one barrier at a time. As just one example, I had to sue the Toronto Transit Commission personally under the Human Rights Code to get them to announce all subway stops so that I'd know what stop I was at. I won that case in 2005. I then had to sue them again to get them to take that same principle, the duty to announce all stops, and to apply it to their buses and streetcars. I won that case in 2007. And on winning those 2 cases, not all Ontario public transit authorities were prepared to fall in line and obey those rulings. So I've needed a new law to achieve full accessibility without us having to sue one barrier at a time. We've known from the outset that full accessibility takes time, can't be achieved overnight, but we knew we needed the backing of a strong, effective law to get us there. Our coalition, or its predecessor, I should say, our predecessor coalition, fought vigorously and tenaciously for 10 years, from late 1994 till 2005, to win the enactment of the law we sought. It's called the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. The McGuinty Liberals are to be commended for developing it in consultation with us and for enacting it. And the 2 opposition parties, the NDP and the Conservatives, are to be commended for unanimously supporting that legislation when it passed in the legislature in May of 2005. We're here today because we need effective and strong commitments to ensure that that law gets effectively implemented and enforced. That law requires Ontario to become fully accessible by 2025. That was 20 years after the day the law was passed and is under 14 years from now. Well, how are we doing so far? Over the past 6 years since the law was passed, to the credit of the McGuinty government, we are nonpartisan. We give credit where it's due and criticism where warranted. To the credit of the McGuinty government, they've taken a number of important steps to implement that legislation. 2 accessibility standards have been passed, a relatively weak customer service accessibility standard, and this past June, a more substantial and helpful accessibility standard to address barriers in public transportation, in access to information and communication, and in access to employment. However, while progress has been made, there is still a great deal to be done. Don't take my word for it. In 2009, under the Disabilities Act, the government was required to appoint an independent review to see how we're doing, whether we're on schedule, and what more needs to be done. That review was conducted by Mr. Charles Beer. Mr. Beer's report, rendered to the government a year and a half ago and made public a year ago, May, basically found that the government needs to revitalize and substantially strengthen its implementation of the Disabilities Act if we are to reach full accessibility by 2025. With this election approaching, we wrote the 3 parties on the 15th of July, listing a series of detailed commitments that we believe are needed in order to achieve the goal of full accessibility, to get back on schedule for full accessibility by 2025. And we asked the parties in this election, as we have in the past 4, to make commitments specifically to us. Now, we're an unusual coalition because usually political parties set out their campaign pledges in their own campaign platforms, but over the past 4 elections and this one, their campaign pledges on this topic have been set out in letters to our coalition or its predecessor. Well, what did we get? We are now making public for the first time the letters received over the past 2 weeks in the order received from the Liberal Party, the New Democratic Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, and the Green Party. Available in this room and shortly available on our website will be all 4 of those letters and an issue-by-issue breakdown of what each party committed under the 11 major areas where we sought commitments. I'll review them in just a moment. Let me begin by saying, before I get to the details of these letters, that we have had, commendably, a very good working relationship with all 3 parties in the legislature. That's not to say anything negative about the Green Party, they just haven't been in the legislature. But for all parties in the legislature, the government has been very good since taking office in 2003 in working together with us, not always agreeing with us, but having open and candid discussions. There were 2 major exceptions to that in their reforms to the Human Rights Code and in their changes to the Elections Act. But even then, we got some progress towards the end on the Elections Act. But with those exceptions, we've had a very good working relationship with them, being able to share our concerns and to discuss their concerns. Similarly, we've had a very good relationship with the NDP and Conservative caucuses, being able to raise our concerns with them. We are nonpartisan and we work with everybody. And being able to ask them to raise our concerns in the legislature in areas if the government wasn't acting as we thought they should.